I never told anyone this before, not my wife, not my therapist, not even in those late-night confessions over too many beers with old friends. But it's been eating at me for years, like a shadow that follows you even when the lights are on. I have to get it out now, before it consumes me completely. It started back in the summer of '98, when I inherited that godforsaken house from my estranged uncle. He was a recluse, holed up in that crumbling Victorian mansion on the outskirts of Milford, Pennsylvania, for decades. No one knew much about him, just that he'd made his money in some shady import-export business during the war and never left the place after his wife died young. When the lawyer handed me the keys, it felt like a curse wrapped in opportunity. I was broke, fresh out of a divorce, and figured I could flip the property for quick cash. God, if I'd only known. The drive up there was uneventful. Just endless stretches of rural highway, flanked by overgrown fields and skeletal trees that clawed at the sky. Milford itself was a ghost town, boarded up shops, a diner that smelled like grease and regret, and locals who eyed my rental car like I was intruding on their misery. The house loomed at the end of a winding dirt road, hidden behind a thicket of ancient oaks whose branches twisted like arthritic fingers. It was massive, 3 stories of faded gray clapboard with a wraparound porch, sagging under the weight of neglect. Turrets poked up like watchful eyes, and the windows, oh, those windows were tall and narrow, smeared with grime that made them look like they were weeping. I remember stepping out of the car, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and something metallic like old blood. The key stuck in the lock at first, as if the house didn't want me inside. Pushing the door open released a sigh of stale air, carrying whispers of dust and decay. The foyer was grand once, with a sweeping staircase that curved up into darkness. But now the wallpaper peeled in long strips, revealing plaster cracked like spider webs. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors, each one stirring up motes that danced in the slanting afternoon light. I dropped my duffel bag and started exploring, telling myself it was just an old house, nothing more. The living room had furniture shrouded in yellowed sheets, like ghosts frozen in place. I pulled one off a high back chair and coughed as dust billowed out. Underneath, the upholstery was faded velvet, stained with what looked like ink blots, or maybe something else. I shook it off and moved to the kitchen, where the cabinets hung open, empty except for a few rusted cans and a nest of what might have been mouse droppings. The sink dripped steadily, a rhythmic plink that set my teeth on edge. As evening fell, I decided to stay the night, save on motel costs, I reasoned. I unpacked a sleeping bag in what seemed like the master bedroom upstairs, a cavernous space with a 4-poster bed draped in moth-eaten curtains. The walls were lined with bookshelves, crammed with leather-bound tomes on occult history and forgotten folklore. My uncle's reading tastes, apparently. I flipped through one, yellowed pages filled with diagrams of strange symbols, but it was all gibberish to me. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters like impatient knocks. I lay down, staring at the ceiling where water stains bloomed like Rorschach tests. That's when the first noise came, a soft creak from the hallway, like someone shifting their weight on the floorboards. I sat up, heart thudding. "Hello," I called out, feeling foolish. Silence answered, thick and mocking. I chalked it up to the house settling, old wood contracting in the cooling night. But as I drifted toward sleep, it happened again, footsteps, deliberate and slow, pacing just outside my door. Not the scamper of animals, but the measured tread of shoes on wood. I froze, straining to listen. They stopped right at the threshold, and then nothing. No doorknob turning, no further sound. Just the drip from the kitchen faucet downstairs, now seeming louder, more insistent. I told myself it was imagination, the isolation playing tricks. But sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of shadowy figures watching from the corners of the room. Morning brought relief, sunlight filtering through the grimy panes like a hesitant visitor. I shook off the unease and got to work assessing the place. The basement was a nightmare dank, with stone walls slick from seepage and shelves crammed with jars of preserved things, fruits, specimens. I didn't look too closely. Upstairs, I found a locked door at the end of the second-floor hall. The key from the ring fit after some jiggling, revealing an attic study cluttered with my uncle's papers. Yellowed letters, faded photographs of a woman his wife, I assumed with eyes that seemed to follow me. One photo showed her standing in front of the house, her smile forced, shadows pooling unnaturally at her feet. I rifled through a desk drawer and found a journal. Its pages filled with frantic scrawl, entries about whispers in the walls, and Orr voice calling from the void. Crazy old man stuff, I thought, but a chill prickled my skin. That afternoon, while clearing out the parlor, I heard it again, not footsteps, but a murmur, low and indistinct, like voices behind a closed door. I followed the sound to the staircase, where it seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Pressing my ear to the paneling, I caught fragments, come back, or maybe, don't leave. It faded as quickly as it came, leaving me doubting my sanity. Was there a radio somewhere? Neighbors. But the nearest house was miles away. I busied myself with repairs, hammering loose boards. But the noises persisted, scratches in the attic, thumps from empty rooms. By dusk, the house felt alive, breathing in sync with my growing paranoia. Dinner was a sad affair, canned soup heated on a camp stove. As I ate in the dim kitchen light, a shadow flitted across the window. Not a branch too humanoid. I bolted outside with a flashlight, sweeping the beam over the overgrown yard. Nothing but rustling leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Back inside, I locked every door, but the locks felt flimsy, symbolic. That night, the footsteps returned, bolder. They circled my bed, pausing at the foot as if observing. I lay rigid, sweat soaking the sleeping bag, whispering prayers I hadn't uttered since childhood. Then, a new horror, a cold breath on my neck, carrying the faint scent of lavender perfume. My uncle's wife had worn lavender, according to family lore. Days blurred into a routine of denial and dread. I'd work during the day, cataloging valuables, a silver tea set, antique clocks that ticked erratically, and at night, endure the symphony of the unseen. Whispers evolved into sobs, echoing from the vents like a woman in anguish. I'd wake to find objects moved, a book open to a page about seances, a chair pulled out as if for a guest. Once, I found fingerprints on the mirror, small and delicate, not mine. I started talking to myself, rationalizing wind, animals, my mind cracking under stress. But deep down, I knew the house wasn't empty. Something lingered, tethered to the bones of the place. One evening, storm clouds gathered, thunder rumbling like distant artillery. Power flickered wait. There was no power. I'd been using a generator. Lightning illuminated the rooms in stark flashes, casting elongated shadows that danced grotesquely. I retreated to the study, poring over the journal for clues. My uncle wrote of arguments with his wife, her growing obsession with the occult after a miscarriage. She opened doors that can't be closed. One entry read, "Now she waits, hungry for company." A crash downstairs jolted me glass-shattering. I descended cautiously, flashlight beam trembling. The foyer window was broken, shards glittering on the floor. But the break was from inside, as if something had tried to escape. Panic set in. I grabbed my keys, intent on fleeing, but the front door wouldn't budge. Locked from outside. Impossible. As I struggled, the whispers swelled into a chorus, surrounding me. "Stay with me." A hand icy, insubstantial brushed my arm. I screamed, bolting upstairs, barricading myself in the bedroom. Hours passed in terror, the storm raging outside mirroring the chaos within. Dawn broke, and the door opened easily. I packed frantically, vowing never to return. But here's the confession, the part that's haunted me all these years as I drove away. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw her. My uncle's wife, standing in the attic window, her face pale and pleading. Only it wasn't her. It was my ex-wife's face, the one who'd left me after our own loss, a stillborn child we'd never discussed. She waved goodbye, or perhaps beckoned me back. I sold the house sight unseen, but sometimes, in quiet moments, I hear the whispers again, not from walls, but from inside my head. And I wonder if I ever truly left, or if part of me stayed behind, waiting. Story number 2. I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding like it's trying to escape my chest, and I swear I can still feel that cold draft on the back of my neck. If I'd listened to that nagging voice in my head, the one that said, "Don't go down there, just leave it alone," my life might not be this endless loop of nightmares and second-guessing. But I did go down there, into that basement room no one in the family ever spoke about, and now I carry whatever was waiting in the dark with me, like a shadow that doesn't need light to follow. It all started last fall, when my grandmother passed away. She was 92, sharp as a tack until the end, living in that rambling old farmhouse on the edge of Willow Creek, upstate New York. The place had been in our family for generations, built back in the 1800s by some distant ancestor who made his fortune in logging. After the funeral, my mom and aunts gathered to sort through her things, and that's when they asked me to help with the cleanup. I was between jobs, laid off from my tech gig in the city, and figured it was a good excuse to get out of my cramped apartment. "Just a few days," Mom said over the phone, her voice tired but insistent. Why need someone strong to handle the heavy lifting in the basement? She paused then, like she'd said too much, and quickly added, "The storage stuff, you know." I arrived on a crisp October afternoon, the leaves turning that fiery red and gold that makes you forget how brutal winter can be up there. The house sat at the end of a gravel driveway, surrounded by woods that pressed in close, their branches scratching at the siding when the wind blew. It was a 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch, the paint peeling in places, but sturdy enough. Inside, it smelled like old books and faint lavender, Graham's favorite scent. My aunts, Karen and Lisa, were already there, bustling around the kitchen with boxes and packing tape. "Hey, kiddo," Aunt Karen said, hugging me tight. She was the oldest, practical and no-nonsense, with her gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. "Thanks for coming. We've got the upstairs mostly done, but the basement, well, it's a mess." Aunt Lisa nodded, avoiding my eyes as she labeled a box of china. Just be careful down there. The stairs are steep. That first evening, we sat around the dining table, eating takeout pizza, reminiscing about Graham. Stories about her baking apple pies, her quirky habit of collecting antique dolls, how she'd raised 3 girls on her own after Grandpa died young. But whenever the conversation drifted toward the house itself, the history, the odd little quirks, no one mentioned the basement. I brought it up once, casually. So, what's the deal with down there? Graham ever talk about it? Mom shot Aunt Karen a look, quick but noticeable. "Oh, it's just storage," Mom said, forcing a smile. "Old furniture, holiday decorations. Nothing exciting." Aunt Lisa changed the subject to the weather, and that was that. I didn't push it. Families have their silences, right? But lying in the guest room that night, listening to the house creak and settle, I felt a prickle of curiosity. Why the avoidance? The next morning, I tackled the basement. The door was at the back of the kitchen, heavy oak with a brass knob that felt icy even in the warm house. It stuck at first, like it hadn't been opened in years, and when it finally gave way, a rush of cool, musty air hit me. Damp earth mixed with something sharper, like rust or old metal. The stairs were wooden, narrow, descending into dimness, lit only by a single bare bulb dangling from a cord. I flipped the switch, and it flickered to life, casting long shadows. "All right," I muttered to myself, grabbing a flashlight just in case. Let's see what the big secret is. Down there, it was bigger than I expected, a low-ceilinged space divided into sections by brick walls. Boxes stacked haphazardly, covered in dust. An old washing machine rusted in one corner, shelves lined with canning jars, their contents long turned to sludge. But at the far end, partially hidden behind a pile of mildewed crates, was another door, plain, unpainted wood, with a simple latch. No lock, but it looked out of place, like it had been added later. I cleared the crates away, my arms aching from the effort, and tried the latch. It lifted easily, but the door wouldn't budge. Stuck, maybe swollen from humidity. I gave it a shove, and it groaned open, revealing a small room beyond maybe 10 by 10 feet, windowless, with bare concrete floors and walls that seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight. Inside, it was empty except for a single wooden chair in the center, facing away from the door, and a small table beside it holding a dusty oil lamp. The air was thicker here, stagnant, with that metallic tang stronger, almost like blood. I stepped in, shining the beam around. Scratches on the walls, deep gouges, like nails had clawed at the concrete. And on the floor, faint stains, dark and irregular. My skin crawled. It felt wrong, like walking into a tomb. "What the hell is this?" I whispered, my voice echoing oddly. I sat in the chair for a moment, just to test its sturdy, but cold through my jeans. As I did, a faint sound drifted from somewhere, a whisper. No, probably the wind through vents upstairs. I shook it off and left, closing the door behind me. But as I climbed the stairs, I could have sworn I heard the latch click shut on its own. That afternoon, while we packed more boxes, I mentioned the room to Aunt Karen. We were in the living room, wrapping knick-knacks in newspaper. "Hey, what's with that little room in the basement? The one behind the crates." Her hands froze mid-wrap, and she looked at me sharply. "You went in there?" Her tone was accusatory, like I'd broken some unspoken rule. "Yeah, why?" "It's empty, but kinda creepy." She set the figurine down carefully. "Your grandmother, she didn't like us talking about it. Said it was just an old root cellar or something. Best to leave it be." Mom walked in then, catching the tail end. Leave what be. Aunt Karen shook her head. Nothing. Just basement junk. But Mom's face paled a bit. You didn't open that door, did you? I laughed it off. It's fine, guys. Empty room. No big deal. But their reactions stuck with me. A seed of unease planting itself. That night, sleep didn't come easy. The guest room was above the kitchen, and around midnight, I heard it a soft thump from below, like something heavy shifting. Then footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing across the basement floor. I sat up listening. The house was old pipes, maybe, but it continued, back and forth, stopping right under where the basement door would be. I slipped downstairs in my socks, heart thudding, and pressed my ear to the door. Silence now, but the knob was freezing again. I opened it a crack, shining my phone's light down the stairs. Nothing, just shadows. As I closed it, though, a draft whispered up, carrying that metallic scent, and I felt eyes on me, like something was watching from the dark. The next day, I couldn't stay away. While the others were out running errands, I went back down. The door to the room was ajar now, though I'd swear I'd closed it. Inside, the chair had been moved slightly, angled toward the door, as if waiting for someone. On the table, the oil lamp had a fresh wick, and there was a matchbook I hadn't noticed before. My pulse quickened. This is stupid, I told myself, but I lit the lamp anyway, the flame flickering to life and casting wavering shadows. The scratches on the walls looked deeper in that light, forming patterns almost like words, frantic and illegible. I traced one with my finger, and a chill shot up my arm. Then the whispering started, faint at first, like wind through cracks, but growing clearer. Help me. A woman's voice, weak and pleading. I spun around, but the room was empty. The flame guttered, and the door slammed shut with a bang that echoed like a gunshot. I yanked at the handle, panic rising it wouldn't open. Hey, I shouted, thinking maybe one of my aunts was pranking me. But no answer. The whispers intensified, surrounding me now. Stay with me. The air grew colder, my breath visible in puffs. Shadows on the walls seemed to move, elongating into shapes, hands reaching out, faces contorted in agony. I pounded on the door, screaming until finally it gave way. I tumbled out, scrambling up the stairs on all fours, slamming the kitchen door behind me. My aunts found me there, shaking, when they returned. What happened? Mom asked, her face ashen. I told them, stammering about the voices, the door. Aunt Lisa burst into tears. We should have told him, she sobbed. Aunt Karen sighed. That room, Graham said Grandpa, locked something in there after the war. He came back different, haunted. Said he brought a spirit home with him, a woman he'd wronged overseas. Graham never went down there after he died. We promised not to speak of it. We left that night, boarding up the basement door before we went. But it didn't end. Back in my apartment, the nightmares started, me in that chair, unable to move, as shadowy figures closed in, whispering secrets I didn't want to hear. Sometimes, I smell that metallic tang in the air, or hear faint scratches on my walls. I've thought about going back, burning the place down, but what if that sets it free? What if it's already followed me? Every creak in the night, every shadow in the corner, I wonder if it's her, waiting for me to sit down one last time. And God help me, part of me wants to listen. Story number 3 for years. I've kept this buried deep inside me, like a splinter that's worked its way under the skin and festered. I've woken up in cold sweats, heart racing, convinced that if I spoke it aloud, it would summon whatever lurked in that place back into my life. Therapists called it PTSD, friends said I was just stressed from the job. But tonight, as I sit here in my dimly lit apartment, with the rain pattering against the window like impatient fingers, I can't hold it in anymore. It's been exactly 10 years since that night at Hillcrest Manor, and the knocks have started again, faint at first, but growing louder. If I don't get this out, if I don't warn someone, anyone, I fear it'll drag me under for good. So here it is, my confession, my curse, the story of what happened when I stepped into that forsaken house and invited the darkness to follow me home. It all began with a dare, the kind that sounds harmless over cheap beer and laughter. I was 28, working as a freelance photographer in Boston, scraping by on gigs, shooting weddings and corporate headshots. My buddies, Mike, Sarah, and Tom were urban explorers, the type who snuck into abandoned factories and asylums for the thrill. They'd been talking up Hillcrest Manor for weeks, this sprawling estate on the outskirts of Salem, Massachusetts, shrouded in local legends. Built in the 1800s by a wealthy merchant named Elias Hillcrest, it was said to be cursed after his family vanished one stormy night in 1897. No bodies, no clues, just empty rooms and a journal entry about knocks in the night that beckon the unwary. The place had been boarded up since the 50s, a magnet for ghost hunters and vandals. Come on, Alex. Mike had goaded me that Friday evening at the bar. You're the one with the fancy camera. Document it for us. It'll be epic content for your portfolio. I laughed it off at first, but the allure of those eerie shots, decaying grandeur under moonlight hooked me. We set out that night, armed with flashlights, energy drinks, and a false sense of bravado. The drive took us through winding back roads, the kind where the trees arch overhead like a skeletal canopy, blocking out the stars. Fog rolled in as we approached, thick and cloying, reducing our headlights to hazy glows. Hillcrest Manor emerged from the mist like an apparition, itself a Gothic behemoth of weathered stone and ivy-choked turrets, its windows black voids staring back at us. The iron gates were rusted open, creaking faintly in the wind, as if whispering a reluctant welcome. We parked off the road and slipped through, our footsteps crunching on the overgrown gravel path. This place is massive, Sarah whispered, her voice laced with excitement and a hint of nerves. Tom shone his light on the front door, half off its hinges, revealing a foyer swallowed by shadows. We pushed inside, the air hitting us like a slapped stale, heavy with dust and the faint rot of forgotten things. I snapped my first photo, the flash illuminating peeling wallpaper patterned with faded roses, as if the house had tried to bloom once and failed. We explored the ground floor first, moving room by room in a loose huddle. The parlor was frozen in time velvet, drapes moth-eaten and sagging. A grand piano in the corner with keys yellowed like old teeth. Mike plunked a note, and it echoed discordantly, hanging in the air too long. Creepy as hell, he grinned. But I noticed how his eyes darted to the corners. Sarah found an old portrait above the mantel, a stern man with piercing eyes, presumably Elias himself. "Look at that stare," she said, shivering. "Like he's judging us." We laughed, but as we moved on, I felt it a subtle shift, like the house was exhaling, settling around us. Doors we passed creaked open an inch or two behind us, as if nudged by invisible hands. Wind, Tom suggested, but there was no breeze inside. I captured it, all the dust motes dancing in our beams, the shadows that seemed to stretch toward us like fingers. Upstairs, the dread began to build, slow and insidious. The staircase groaned under our weight, each step a protest. The hallway stretched into darkness, lined with doors that led to bedrooms stripped bare, save for rusted bed frames and wardrobes yawning open. In one room, we found a child's rocking horse, its painted eyes chipped and vacant, rocking ever so slightly as we entered. "Must be a draft," Sarah muttered, but her voice trembled. I knelt to photograph it, and as the flash fired, I swear the horse's head turned a fraction, its wooden mouth curving into a grimace. Shaking it off, I joined the others in what must have been the master suite. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, its canopy shredded like claws had torn through it. Tom flopped onto the mattress, sending up a cloud of dust. "Comfy," he joked, but then froze. "Did you hear that?" We all did a faint knock, like knuckles on wood coming from downstairs. Once, twice, then silence. "Probably an animal," Mike said, but we exchanged uneasy glances. The clock on my phone read 11:45 p.m. Midnight was approaching, and with it, the legends whispered about knocks that lured people deeper into the manor. We decided to split up briefly, Mike and Tom to check the attic, Sarah and I the basement. Stupid in hindsight, but adrenaline makes you bold. Sarah and I descended the narrow stairs to the lower level, the air growing colder, damper, with a metallic tang that coated my tongue. The basement was a labyrinth of stone walls and alcoves crammed with crates, cobwebs draping like veils. Our flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing rusted tools and shelves of glass jars filled with murky liquids. "This is straight out of a horror flick," Sarah whispered, her breath visible in the chill. We turned a corner and found a heavy door, bolted shut with a padlock long since corroded. Curiosity won. Tom had brought bolt cutters earlier for the gates. We snapped the lock, and the door swung inward with a sigh, revealing a small chamber. Inside, chains dangled from the ceiling, and the floor was stained dark in patterns that looked too deliberate. Whispers started, then soft, indistinguishable, like voices murmuring just out of earshot. "You hear that?" I asked. Sarah nodded, wide-eyed. "Let's get out of here." Back upstairs, we regrouped in the foyer, but Mike and Tom were late. The knocks came again, louder this time. Rhythmic knock, 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 pausing, then repeating. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, vibrating through the floorboards. "Guys," Sarah called up the stairs. No answer. We climbed to the second floor, the shadows seeming thicker now, pooling in corners like ink. In the hallway, a door we'd left open was now closed, and as we approached, it creaked ajar, revealing nothing but empty space. My camera felt heavy in my hands. I snapped photos compulsively, the flashes strobing like lightning. In one shot, reviewed later, I saw it a silhouette in the background, humanoid but elongated, gone in the next frame. "Where are they?" Sarah's voice cracked. The whispers grew, forming words. "Join us." "Stay." We pushed into the attic access. A pull-down ladder leading to a musty space filled with trunks and mannequins, draped in tattered clothes. Mike's flashlight lay abandoned on the floor, still on, its beam pointing to a wall where scratches formed frantic letters. "Itik Sikes, Forwu." Panic set in. We called their names, searched the rafters, but they were gone. The knocks escalated, booming now, shaking the house like thunder. Midnight struck, my phone chimed softly, and the manor came alive. Doors slammed in sequence down the hall, shadows detached from walls, slithering across the floor toward us. Whispers turned to wails, echoing accusations. Thief. Murderer. Ours now. Sarah screamed as something brushed her leg, cold and clammy. We bolted down the stairs, the steps buckling under us, as if the wood was softening, grasping. In the foyer, the portrait of Elias twisted, his eyes following us, his mouth opening in a silent scream. We burst out the front door, tumbling onto the gravel, gasping. But as we ran to the car, I glanced back, figures in the windows, pale faces pressed to the glass, knocking insistently. We drove straight to the police, babbling about our missing friends. They searched the manor at dawn, found no trace, no bodies, no signs of struggle. Just an empty house, silent and still. They wrote it off as a prank or runaway, but Sarah and I knew better. She moved away soon after, cut all ties. Me. I tried to forget, buried the photos, changed jobs. But the knocks followed. At first, in dreams, rhythmic tapping on my bedroom door at midnight. Then, in waking hours on windows, walls, even my car dashboard during late drives. I've moved 3 times, but it finds me. Last night, it was on my apartment door, and when I peeked through the peephole, I saw it a shadow, waiting, hand raised to knock again. Whatever curse Elias brought upon that manor, it doesn't let go. It beckons, and one day, I fear I'll answer. Story number 4, listen. If you're hearing this, whether it's some podcast or a random video that popped up in your feed, turn it off right now. I mean it. Don't let curiosity drag you in like it did me. I'm only sharing this because the weight of it is crushing me, and maybe, just maybe, putting it out there will loosen its grip. But heed my warning, never, ever stay in an old farmhouse out in the middle of nowhere. Especially one with a history that the locals whisper about, but never explain. I made that mistake 5 years ago, renting what I thought was a quaint getaway in rural Vermont to clear my head after a brutal breakup. It was supposed to be a week of solitude, writing my novel, breathing fresh air. Instead, it became a nightmare that clings to me, like the damp chill of that place. If I'd known about the family that never left the ones trapped in the walls, the soil, the very air I'd have driven straight past. But I didn't, and now they're with me, waiting for the right moment to remind me I'm not alone. It started innocently enough. I'd found the listing on one of those vacation rental sites, buried under filters for rustic and affordable. The photos showed a weathered 2-story farmhouse with a red barn fading to pink, set against rolling hills that turned golden in autumn. The description mentioned it was built in 1852, with original hardwood floors and a stone fireplace charming, right? The owner, a distant relative selling off family property, was vague in the emails, quiet spot, lots of history. No Wi-Fi, perfect for unplugging. I booked it for mid-October, when the leaves were peaking, and drove up from Boston on a Friday afternoon. The GPS led me down increasingly narrow roads, past cornfields stripped bare and silos, standing like silent sentinels. The air through my cracked window smelled of wet earth and decaying foliage. That crisp fall scent mixed with something earthier, like turned soil after rain. Arriving at dusk, the house looked smaller than the photos, hunkered down in a shallow valley ringed by dense woods. The paint was peeling in curls, white giving way to gray underneath, and the front porch sagged slightly on one side, as if weary from years of bearing weight. I parked my Subaru in the gravel drive, grabbed my bags, and let myself in with the key hidden under a flower pot as instructed. The door creaked open on hinges that begged for oil, releasing a puff of air that carried the faint odor of wood smoke and something mustier, like old attics and forgotten cellars. Inside, the living room was sparsely furnished, a threadbare sofa facing the fireplace, a kitchen table scarred from decades of use, and walls lined with faded photographs in mismatched frames. I dropped my stuff and explored, flipping on lights that buzzed faintly like trapped insects. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms, one with a brass bed and quilt that smelled faintly of lavender soap. The other smaller, with a child's wooden cradle in the corner, empty and dust-covered. That first night, I built a fire to chase away the chill, the logs crackling and popping as flames licked upward. I heated some soup on the ancient stove and sat with my laptop, outlining my story. But the silence outside was absolute. No cars, no neighbors, just the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of leaves. Around midnight, as I climbed into bed, I heard a soft thump from downstairs, like a door closing gently. I froze under the covers, rationalizing settling house, wind pushing things around. But then came a faint scraping, like nails dragging across wood, followed by the creak of floorboards under invisible weight. It moved from the kitchen to the stairs, ascending slowly, each step deliberate. My heart hammered as it paused outside my door. Nothing more. I lay there, staring at the ceiling beams shadowed in moonlight, until sleep claimed me uneasily. The next morning, sunlight streamed through lace curtains yellowed with age, banishing the night's unease. I made coffee strong and black, the aroma filling the kitchen, and decided to poke around outside. The barn was locked with a rusted chain, but through a cracked board, I glimpsed old farm equipment shrouded in cobwebs, and something else, a weathered headstone. No, probably just a marker for livestock. Curiosity piqued. I drove into the nearest town, a speck called Harrow's Bend, about 10 miles away. It had a general store, a diner, and a library that doubled as a historical society. I stopped at the diner first, ordering eggs and bacon at the counter. The waitress, an older woman with pinned-up gray hair and a name tag reading, Ethel, poured my coffee with a steady hand, staying at the old Whittaker place. She asked, eyeing my city clothes. I nodded, surprised. "How'd you know?" She shrugged. "Only rental around here. Folks don't stay long." When I pressed for details, she busied herself, wiping the counter. Just legends. Best not to dig. Undeterred, I headed to the library, a squat brick building with creaking floors and the smell of aging paper. The librarian, Mr. Harlan, a bespectacled man in his 70s, perked up when I asked about the farmhouse's history. "Ah, the Whittaker farm. Dark tale there." He pulled out a file of yellowed clippings and a slim book on local folklore. The property was homesteaded by Josiah Whittaker in 1852, a stern Puritan type who moved his family from Massachusetts seeking fertile land. Josiah, his wife Abigail, and their 5 children tilled the soil, raised cattle, and lived isolated lives. But in 1867, tragedy struck. A harsh winter brought famine, and one by one, the children sickened and died. Legend said Josiah, driven mad by grief, blamed Abigail for inviting the devil. Through her herbal remedies, witchcraft whispers, echoing Salem's shadow. One night, he allegedly locked the family in the house during a blizzard, boarding windows and doors, convinced evil spirits were outside. Come spring, neighbors found the place silent. Inside, bodies frozen in place. Josiah at the table with a Bible, Abigail in the kitchen, the remaining children in their beds. But the youngest, a girl named Eliza, was missing. No body, No trace. Mr. Harlan leaned in, his voice dropping. Folks say the family never left. Eliza's spirit wanders, searching for a way out. But the others? They keep her there, jealous of the living. Strange things happen, knocks on walls, cries in the night, smells of rot where there shouldn't be. Last tenants in the 80s fled after a week, claiming hands pulled at them in the dark. I laughed it off as small-town superstition, but as I drove back, the story gnawed at me. The farmhouse looked different now, its windows like watchful eyes, the woods encroaching as if to swallow it whole. That afternoon, I cleaned the place a bit, dusting shelves and sweeping floors that released puffs of grit smelling like dry hay and faint decay. In the pantry, I found old jars of preserves, labels faded, contents blackened. One shelf held a leather-bound journal, pages brittle, Josiah's handwriting, entries from 1866. The land yields poorly this year. Abigail's potions fail. The children weaken. Later, whispers in the barn at night. Eliza speaks of shadows calling her name. I set it aside, chills prickling my arms despite the warm stove. As evening fell, I cooked pasta, the sizzle of garlic in oil comforting. But midway through dinner, a cold draft snaked through the room, carrying the scent of frozen earth and something metallic, like blood on snow. The fire dimmed suddenly, flames guttering as if starved of oxygen. Night brought the sounds again. I was reading in bed when the scraping returned, this time from the walls themselves like fingers clawing for purchase. Then, a child's voice, muffled and distant. "Mama, it's cold." I bolted upright, sheets tangling. "Hello?" My voice echoed hollowly. Silence, then footsteps padding down the hall, small and bare. They stopped at my door, and I heard breathing shallow, ragged. The knob turned slowly, but the door didn't open. I stared at it frozen until the presence retreated, footsteps fading downstairs. Sleep evaded me, every creak was a summons, every shadow a form taking shape. By day 3, paranoia set in. I ventured into the barn, forcing the chain with bolt cutters from my trunk. Inside, the air was thick with dust and manure long dried, tools rusted on hooks. In the back, a makeshift graveyard, simple stones marking John 1858-1867, Mary 1860-1867, and so on for the children except Eliza. No dates for her. As I photographed them for research, a board creaked overhead and hay dust sifted down like snow. I fled, heart pounding, the smell of rot clinging to my clothes. Evenings blurred into terror. Smells invaded lavender one moment, then the acrid tang of smoke, as if the house remembered a fire that never was. Sounds escalated, knocks on windows, like branches tapping, but the trees were too far. One night, I woke to pressure on my chest, invisible weight pinning me. Whispers encircled, "Stay with us. The cold is coming." I thrashed free, gasping, the room icy despite the heater. Downstairs, the journal lay open on the table. I hadn't touched it, page turned to. Eliza sees them. They want in. Desperation drove me back to town. Ethel at the diner relented over pie. My grandma knew the Whittakers, said Josiah buried Eliza alive in the cellar to save her soul. Neighbors heard cries for days, but the snow was too deep. After the family changed. Wouldn't leave even as they starved. Ghost now bound to the land, Mr. Harlan added clippings, unexplained deaths on the property, a farmer in 1920 hanged in the barn, a family in 1955 vanishing overnight. The Whittakers claim what's theirs, he warned. My last night storm winds howled, rain lashing the windows like accusations. I packed to leave at dawn, but sleep came unbidden. Dreams merged with reality. I was Eliza, trapped in darkness, soil pressing in, voices calling from above. Waking. The room was pitch black, power out. A glow emanated from the hall, faint bluish. I followed, compelled, down creaking stairs to the kitchen. There, by the fireplace, stood figures translucent, frozen in tableau. Josiah at the table, Bible clutched, Abigail stirring an empty pot, children huddled, eyes hollow. They turned as one, faces gaunt, lips moving soundlessly. Join us. Then, direct contact, a small hand gripped my wrist, icy and unyielding. Eliza's face materialized, pale with dirt-streaked cheeks, eyes pleading yet malevolent. "You're warm," she whispered, voice like cracking ice. "Give it to me." Pain shot through me, cold spreading like frostbite. I wrenched free, stumbling outside into the rain, car keys in hand. Driving away, their forms watched from the windows, hands pressed to glass. I never returned. Sold my things, moved cross-country. But the haunting persists. In quiet moments, I smell frozen earth, hear scratches in walls. Last winter, during a blizzard, a child's handprint appeared on my fogged window from inside. They're patient, the Whitakers. They never left the farmhouse, and now neither can I. If you hear whispers in the cold, run before they claim you too.